Hey everybody, it's Jason with Parallel Reality coming back with you today with an article. This is actually from X. It's an X article. I've done one of these before. Doing it again. This is from Andrew Fox. I don't believe there's a date on here. Is it? Or maybe it's at the bottom. We'll get to it. From July 22nd. There we go. It's called The Gaza War and the West's Reckoning. And all the idiots holding Free Palestine stuff. Morons. Let me go ahead and like this, though, because I'm going to be reading it, so I might as well like it. It says, The Gaza War, while devastating in its own right, has revealed something more profound and more disturbing than the immediate tragedy in the Middle East. It has laid bare the West's internal decline, the dominance of postmodern thinking, a failure of integration, why did I say recognition? A failure of integration, a tolerance for imported hatreds, and a troubling vulnerability to foreign-funded disinformation. What started as a distant conflict has rapidly escalated into chaos on our streets, campuses, and institutions. Anti-Semitism surges. Extremism thrives. Underpinning it all is the exploitation of our freedoms by those seeking to destroy us from within. And that's, these people right here in the picture. But anyway, let's keep going. It says the erosion of moral clarity within Western institutions, as revealed by the Gaza War, is deeply rooted in the intellectual decline caused by postmodern thinking. At the core of this crisis is a shift from objective truth to subjective ideology, where facts become subordinate to feelings and moral judgment is replaced by a hierarchy of perceived victimhood. Postmodernism, which emerged in the mid-20th century, questioned the very concept of objective truth. It contended that all knowledge is socially constructed, that power relations influence all narratives, and that universal values serve as tools of oppression. In the postmodern worldview, there are no heroes or villains, only competing perspectives. That's why you see Hollywood with a lot of the BS that they put out now, which is like, oh, they don't know how to write heroes. Oh, there's why. Postmodernism. Chalk it up to that. It says, when applied to conflict, especially one as morally stark as the war between Israel and Hamas, postmodernism demands a false equivalence. Thus, we end up in a grotesque inversion of reality. A terrorist group that rapes, beheads, and kidnaps civilians is framed as a legitimate resistance movement, while the democratic state defending itself is cast as genocidal. So the death toll is a perfect example. Rather than simply analyzing the data we have, there is a whole academic sector dedicated to proving that the death toll is higher, simply because their feelings tell them it should be. Thus, we see a slew of methodologically, that's a hell of a word, unsound academic reports elevating the death toll based on shaky research that seeks to reverse engineer false conclusions with outcomes predetermined long before the research began. The media report on these studies, and so false data floods the ecosystem of discussion. And keep in mind that stuff about the death toll and what's going on there is coming from the Gaza Health Ministry, which is run by Hamas. They are a very well-known propaganda outlet, so take that how you will, and then reread that paragraph again. It says this is a symptom of the intellectual collapse in Western academia. Campuses steeped in postmodern ideology no longer teach students how to think, but what to feel. Critical thinking, once the very foundation of liberal education, has been replaced by critical theory, which sees every issue through the lens of race, power, and oppression. Truth is not determined by logic or evidence, but by who can claim the greatest victimhood. In this paradigm, Jews are recast as oppressors simply because Israel exists and succeeds, despite their historic suffering and minority status. Yeah, Jews should be actually like history's victims, but we're not doing that shit anymore. It says this mindset has given rise to campus mobs who chant intifada and globalize the resistance without understanding or perhaps not caring what those slogans involve. Yeah, it's both of those things. As it fuels the journalist who insists that context justifies atrocities, and the NGO that parrots Hamas death tolls without a shred of source criticism. Postmodernism has eroded our epistemological defenses, our ability to distinguish truth from propaganda, justice from barbarism. It has also corrupted our moral vocabulary. Terms like genocide, colonialism, and apartheid are now used as serious legal or historical concepts, but as tools to attack the West and defend its enemies. As with spurious death toll studies, in the postmodern framework, these labels are not meant to be proven, they are meant to feel true, mainly when spoken by someone with the right identity or ideological stance. Yeah, and I've said before, if anybody is talking to you about the Israel-Gaza thing and they mention, unironically, and I'm talking about people on the left, they say there's genocide or apartheid and say, occupation, you can just disregard everything they have to say about it because they don't know what they're talking about. So it says this is why facts no longer matter. says Hamas can release a propaganda video and it spreads faster than any IDF rebuttal, and we've seen that how many times at this point. It says the rape and massacre of Israeli civilians is downplayed, while the mere accusation of disproportionate response becomes the dominant story. In a postmodern culture, emotion often trumps evidence. Narrative is everything. And if the result suits the ideological agenda, then it becomes sacred and untouchable. It says the ultimate outcome is a culture that is disarmed in the face of evil. When morality is solely defined by power, victims who possess any form of power, be Jews, Israel, and the West, are recast as villains. This is the crux of the matter. We are not seeing just an attack on Israel. This is an attack on the West. It has been amplified by multiculturalism, which has been implemented without a demand for shared values. We now see the West colonized by parallel communities in which anti-Western, anti-Jewish ideologues have festered for decades before erupting into flames after the spark of Gaza. Mass immigration without meaningful assimilation has created fractured societies, unhappy on both sides of the debate. Just this week, we have seen shameful, violent anti-immigration protests in Spain, Great Britain, Poland, and Ireland. Our societies are fractured, which makes responding to an attack on Western values impossible because these values are no longer entirely shared. Nowhere was this moral confusion more apparent than on American university campuses. As universities that once prided themselves on being centers of free thought have instead become breeding grounds for hatred. As at Harvard, Columbia, and Cornell, students celebrated Hamas's atrocities, blaming Israel for the October 7th massacre. Yeah, they were just sitting around, and then Hamas killed 1,200 of them, and somehow it's their fault. Yeah, okay, that makes sense. So the administrators, terrified of offending activists, responded with cowardice. The line between protest and sympathizing with terror blurred, and Jewish students were left abandoned. This didn't happen by chance. Thus, for decades, Soviet information operations pushed the postmodern line to left-leaning fellow travelers in academia. Russian propaganda continues to encourage, amplify, and assault the fault lines in our societies. The corruption was also bought and paid for in recent years. Qatari billions have flooded Western academia, creating ideological allies on campuses. The result is academic departments that operate more like propaganda tools, a ruined intellectual critical paradigm, financially compromised academics shaping civil servant and media narratives, and student groups like Students for Justice in Palestine that can organize day of rage rallies within hours of Hamas atrocities. And they're like basically a terrorist group, and I think they've been banned in a lot of colleges, and they should just be banned nationwide because they like I said, they are a terrorist group. It says our universities and the state and media institutions they inform have legitimized hatred under the banner of social justice. Off campus, the picture is no better. Western cities have been flooded with pro-Palestinian marches, many of which quickly morphed into pro-Hamas rallies and serve Hamas's strategic goals even when not explicitly stated. In cities from Paris to Berlin, London to Sydney, we have seen violent street theater. Mobs have chanted anti-Semitic and Islamist slogans, praised terrorism, and in some cases openly called for Jews to be gassed. And I'd say even showing a Sieg Heil at a bunch of them too, and Nazi symbols. So how about that? So the protesters waved Hezbollah flags, chanted jihadist slogans, and in some cases, spilt blood. In California, an elderly Jewish man was killed by a demonstrator. Yes, and he was a Jewish, like it says he's a Jewish man, but he was killed by a pro-Palestinian, not a pro-Palestinian guy, I think the guy actually was a Palestinian. It says terror attacks against the Israeli embassy were foiled in London. I was about to say Lebanon, but I don't know what I was going to say. They don't have an embassy probably in Lebanon. But in London, not surprised given what London looks like now. It says 2 Israeli embassy staffers were gunned down outside the Jewish Museum in Washington, D.C. And the man who did that should be publicly executed as far as I'm concerned. Firing squad. Take him out behind the courthouse and end him. What he did, and if you hear the details of it, it's just, dude, like, you should be dealt with the same way that you dealt with those people. It says, here's the key point. These are not just fringe outbursts. If there are Nazi flags at a rally, it becomes a Nazi rally. Well, hello, Palestine rallies. So the same standard should be applied to Palestinian protests. Any anti-Semitism makes them anti-Semitic rallies. Yes, and of course they're that. So the West's openness has become its Achilles heel. Adversaries understand this. Iran, Hamas, Qatar, Russia, and their fellow travelers exploit our freedoms with surgical precision. They flood our social media with lies, fund our institutions, radicalize our youth and our immigrant populations, divide the remainder, and then sit back as our societies unravel from within. Even international law has been weaponized. South Africa, echoing Hamas's own rhetoric, took Israel to the International Court of Justice over false genocide charges. This was lawfare, pure and simple, an attempt to use legal institutions to delegitimize a liberal democracy defending itself against terrorism. The ICJ, by entertaining these claims, granted Hamas the anti-Semitic Holocaust-inverting propaganda victory it sought. And says this is not just about Israel. It never is. As history shows, when anti-Semitism surges, democracy itself is under threat. The Jews are the canary in the coal mine. If we cannot protect them, we have failed to protect the moral integrity of our society. The Gaza conflict has exposed the fault lines. It has demonstrated that Western democracies are at risk not because we are weak, but because we have become complacent. The anti-Semitism now widespread in our streets is a reflection of national health. As Jonathan Tobin said, if as a society we can't stand up and protect our Jewish communities, we are done for. So how do we fight back? How do we defend the values that made our society strong? How can a divided society of strangers restore freedom, reason, tolerance, and truth when a tsunami of malign propaganda and foreign funding floods us? The perfect example in the last 24 hours. Disinformation over Gaza has led to 20 Western governments demanding that Israel immediately cease fire, even though Hamas is the party that rejected the most recent proposed ceasefire deal. It says, I fear we are lost. Our governments cannot ever even recognize the problem, let alone conceive a solution. We are ignoring the canary's warning, and the entire mine is collapsing around us. I mean, it's kind of a doomer article, but he's not wrong. Yeah, I mean, this got a lot of thoughts going through my head, but I think I'd rather just leave it up to you, and you let me know what you think about this. Do you agree? Do you think we're in trouble here, or do you think we need to figure out what the problem is and fix it before things get worse? Let me know in the comments below. Please like, share, and subscribe, and I'll talk to you soon. Bye.